Were you here when they first came?
Yes. They brought it in a couple weeks ago.
The room seems different. And men are coming.
I'm not sure I know what you mean.
I am trying to tell you that you have to watch out. Things can happen. Something happened to me. Something happened to me.
Welcome to Twin Peaks Rewatch. From Idle Thumbs, I am Chris Remo.
I'm Jake Rodkin.
On this episode, we are discussing Part 12 of Twin Peaks: The Return.
Part 12 was written by Mark Frost and David Lynch. It was directed by David Lynch, and it first aired on July 30th, 2017.
On this episode, Agent Preston is brought deeper into the Blue Rose inner circle as questions about Diane intensify. Sarah Palmer struggles with her inner demons, possibly only metaphorically. Ben Horne learns of the full extent of Richard's recent crimes. Hutch and Chantal carry out their bad coop-assigned mission. Audrey Horne makes a convoluted return. We stop in on Cooper, Jerry, Carl Rod, and Jacoby. And even more brand new names are somehow dropped in the Roadhouse.
That's accurate to this.
That's what happened.
To this week's Twin Peaks.
Yep. Actually, before we start, let's just
tear the Band-Aid right off, Chris.
Yeah, we got some crucial email that I think can't wait until the end of the episode. Russell writes in to twinpeaks@idlethumbs.net. In last week's episode, when the Mitchum brothers are on their way to meet up with Dougie, Bradley clearly rips a Band-Aid off of his brother's face. Izzy writes, I'm a new listener, but I love the show. I just listened to the episode 11 recap. Was it not just a plaster he ripped off his brother's face? I was surprised you even mentioned that scene. I expect other people have already emailed you this. Edwin writes, when they were in the car, I believe there was just a Band-Aid over the wound. Tim writes, hey guys, long-time listener, first time writing in, it was a Band-Aid on his face. The whole time you were talking about it, I was yelling, it was a Band-Aid. John writes, great episode, but you spent a lot of time worrying about what was actually a bandage, not a missing wound. We got some YouTube comments that I thought were interesting. YouTube commenter Bill Carr writes, he ripped a Band-Aid off the wound. YouTube commenter John Paddlesick writes, it was a bandage that he removed. YouTube commenter Matthew Padrone writes, guys, it was a Band-Aid. YouTube commenter JMH writes, Rodney had a tan Band-Aid on his face. YouTube commenter Sam Him asks, what is going on with Jake's headphones? By the way, that was a Band-Aid. YouTube commenter Kazuso Ninja writes, a Band-Aid. YouTube commenter Chris XXS writes, have you no concept of how plasters work? And YouTube commenter Clockwork Kubrick points out, hey guys, I just wanted to be the first person to tell you that it is a Band-Aid. So some really interesting mail and comments.
Yeah, it's interesting people are speculating about what things may or may not mean in Twin Peaks: The Return.
We got a lot of theories about what was going on in that inexplicable, baffling scene featuring the Mitchum brothers.
Yeah, where they removed a wound, maybe. I don't know. We'll find out. I mean, there's still a few more episodes left to go, so what that really means will be revealed. Yeah, but if you, I didn't even get to the forums with these, so if you have any interesting theories on that scene, you can write into twinpeaks@idlethumbs.net, post on the forums. You almost said write in a Band-Aid.
Right into Band-Aid@idlethumbs.net.
That your email will bounce instantly.
It'll go exactly where it needs to go.
Yeah. It will go where our awareness of what a Band-Aid looks like went.
Yeah. Anyway, on to the FBI investigation.
Yeah.
In part 12. There's not really a lot of new information gleaned.
I think things that have been hinted at were made aggressively definitive in this scene, right? I mean, when Albert just says, hello there, I'm going to tell you what a Blue Rose case is and all of the agents who have been involved and the complete history of it. I'm going to name drop all of the cool characters from the FBI storyline that you've ever heard.
That was striking to hear him just list Philip Jeffries, Chet Desmond, Dale Cooper, himself.
Him and Gordon.
That was a weird thing to hear all in one sentence. at one time, given how sort of fractured that story has been throughout the history of Twin Peaks.
Yeah, you've it's not a complicated story, but it's one, you're either only ever heard in parts, or the show just is kind of passive or aloof or doesn't really feel the need to spell it out. This is the season where things are spelled out.
Yeah.
Like all the time. Sometimes it's things that you have no context for and people you don't know who they are or anything about them, but it's going to get spelled the fuck out.
Yeah. God, there were a lot of names in this episode.
Yeah.
A lot of names of people we have not yet seen.
I give Twin Peaks a lot of guff on this podcast when it gets into the lore zone, when it,
Sure. Yeah.
And it is admittedly drifting very dangerously into being an X-File in this episode. But because of the history of these characters and because of all this stuff, I totally was excited all the same. I can't help but be happy when Albert, like when he just barfed of that out, when he Chet Desmond and Philip Jeffries and all that stuff. It's like, I already knew that was what the history of all of this stuff was, sure, more or less. But it was still like, as just a Twin Peaks fan dork, it was exciting to hear.
I actually liked all of the FBI stuff on this episode.
Yeah, okay.
I liked it. Yeah,
I was worried that you wouldn't, and I was worried that I wouldn't, but I was pleasantly surprised that I actually enjoyed it.
I liked all of it, but I mean, to your point of spelling things out, I mean, the stuff that was really tough for me in this episode is how, given how little actually happened in terms of action on the show. I mean, there was definitely some forward momentum on this episode that we'll talk about, obviously, but given how much of this episode was like people talking at each other, there were just a lot of references to off-screen characters and things that in total, I mean, between the Audrey reintroduction, I mean, I know we'll talk about these things individually, but just for the episode as a whole, between the Audrey reintroduction, the Roadhouse scene at the end, I mean, there were just a lot of cases of just long bits of characters we either only barely know or in some cases literally have never heard mentioned before.
Yep.
And that was rough.
Yep. But this Albert one was him recounting a history with basically a bunch of old friends and old sort of scraps of story. It felt...
I liked that. And I liked how happy Preston was about being brought in. And I love how happy Cole is about it.
Man, Gordon Cole being so happy about... like that... Yeah, that's actually, I think, the thing that I liked the most about that entire opening scene was the way that David Lynch played Gordon Cole being happy, like not just because like Preston, who seems like she might kind of be a protege of his, but also his performance legitimately sold to me the weight that these characters have been burdened with, of where, where Albert said basically, other than Gordon, I'm the only one who hasn't disappeared. And because of that reason, we haven't really been able to tell anyone about this.
Yeah.
And like those two guys who have basically been stuck in a room for 25 years, unable to let any pressure off of themselves, I felt like David Lynch played that really well. Of just like, he was so happy.
Yeah. I know that that's getting a little bit beyond that scene right this second, but in general, Cole on this episode I found to be extremely enjoyable. He was, I mean, I don't know if there's any direct connection between his happiness in that scene that you're talking about and just the way he was acting elsewhere in this episode, but it felt like there was some degree of...
Maybe I would, that connection is arguable to me, because the other scene could just be because he was with some woman in his hotel room.
Yes, obviously. But I guess I'm not really going anywhere with that. I guess we can just talk about that scene when we get there. But I generally enjoyed Cole on this episode.
Yep.
There's also a very, very, very classic, super classic Albert interaction when Diane comes in and he offers her vodka and she says, "I like it on the rocks," and he says, "You're in luck. The Dakotas are still in the Ice Age," which I just
oh yeah, that's
that.
a good.
I thought that was just a good classic Albert moment.
Yep.
One thing that was pretty clearly clarified, I think, at this point, is that Preston, I mean, unless this is a real long con, Preston seems to genuinely have their trust entirely, and Diane seems to absolutely not have their trust.
Yeah.
I mean that stuff has been sort of up in the air and debatable, I think, over the last few weeks, but that's pretty
just the structure and contents of the scene. They start it with Preston and just tell her everything and then say, "Welcome to the club." Okay, now all of us are going to bring Diane into the room and feed her kind of a half-baked version of this, and then immediately just continue to monitor all of her texts.
Well, yeah, right. And yeah exactly. I mean, yes.
Yeah. It feels like they they don't trust her, and there's probably some very specific. I mean, it seems like they're just using her to get to whatever the hell she's doing.
Yeah.
But lying to her about it.
Yeah.
Wish we knew a little more about that, but it's very clear what's going on in the moment.
What did you make of when she sends the coordinates? What did you make of her? I hope this isn't another Band-Aid situation, but like that I'm just somehow missing something. What was that coordinates +2 thing that she did?
I don't know. I think that just there was some...
Did she have like a memory trick or something?
I thought that she was just saying aloud whatever it was that was on that arm, and it's just not entirely real way that coordinates work, or I don't know enough about how GPS coordinates work.
I just didn't understand the +2 thing because she didn't say any other numbers.
I think that she was just typing and then said one thing aloud to herself. That's all it seemed like to me.
Yeah.
But then her wound was gone.
She tore a wound off of her own arm.
When she tore those coordinates off of Ruth Davenport's arm.
She tore the tattoos off her arm and found the original numbers from the undoctored
+2
photograph. That was how they doctored the photograph for Diane.
Yeah, Albert put a wound on it.
Yeah.
Sorry. What are we talking about? Sorry.
Absolutely nothing. I mean, it's worth mentioning the actual context of the texts, which were Las Vegas ? And because this seems like it might actually matter in this series, Las Vegas was in standard capitalization form, and her response, "They haven't asked yet," was in
all caps.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which Cole and Albert they don't know what that is about.
No.
But before they don't know what that's about, there's this outrageously long scene in which Albert asks Cole to temporarily dismiss his lady companion, and she spends about 20 times as long as she needs to, very demonstratively getting her stuff together and leaving, which I understand why some people find that scene not good or just like straight up objectionable. I kind of found it hilarious personally, because it was just so outrageous. It was so over the top and pushed so far that I kind of liked how absurd it was. I see you do not. Which is fine.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. I liked it more once it crossed the threshold of like, holy crap, this is clearly intended to just go on forever. Mm-hmm. But like, it did less for me than it could have
fair.
for how many minutes of it I was watching.
That's fair enough. I'm not going to mount a spirited defense.
No, but
certainly.
Gordon Cole and David Lynch both clearly enjoyed the hell out of that scene.
I mean, the fact that it was punctuated with Cole's bad French, as well as like she gestures to the wine and says "très bon," and he goes, "It's a good one."
Oh, I know.
All those little things.
All that stuff's
the whole
good.
Combined,
his stupid attempt to make a turn-up pun, but then he reveals that he was giving it in French.
Yeah.
Oh, it was good, but it was.
Wait, in French?
Yeah.
Oh, because he actually I thought he meant she didn't understand the English pun.
Oh, I think that it's because he tried to say it to her in French. That was my word. I thought he just said something along the lines of "it doesn't play in French."
Oh, I thought okay. I thought
that what he said to Albert was she didn't get it either, but I think it's because it doesn't work in French or something like that. Like the implication being that he had somehow tried to deliver a pun in French. Maybe I misunderstood.
It doesn't matter.
Maybe he took a wound off his face.
The joke is basically the same either way. Yeah.
There's a language barrier and his pun failed.
Yeah.
Yep. Gordon Cole, charmer and creator of weird, awkward scene.
I guess part of what made all that stuff work to me also is that it really set the scene for what followed between Cole and Albert, in which Albert is absolutely deadly serious and like not having it with Cole's sort of eccentricity right now.
Yes.
And Cole still has not come down from his fun time.
Right. That's kind of been there's been a weird undercurrent between Gordon and Albert this entire season.
Yeah, there has been.
That I wish that I could pin down and know what it is, but I really enjoy it. It
wouldn't be as good as it is if we knew that.
It's cool that we're seeing these characters 25 years later, and not everything is great. I mean, I guess we were given a tiny glimpse of it when in that scene in one of the early episodes, the sort of blue tinted scene outside the diner when Gordon first turns his thing down, and Albert admits that he kind of just boned some stuff, and Gordon was just like, Albert. But like, it seems like there's
and there's also the "you heard me" moment.
It's just been interesting to see these characters with some friction, with them not being on entirely the same wavelength, like,
but still having an ultimate understanding of one another.
Yes, they still work together well. They have an understanding of each other. They're both driven to do the same thing, but sort of maybe who they are as people has drifted.
I mean, I guess to sort of speak to what I was talking about, I don't remember if it was last week or the week before, and I know I also mentioned this much earlier in the season, but to what I see as one of the themes of this season being aging, people generally getting older, sort of life continuing, and what that means for people, for places, for relationships. I think I was talking about it most recently in the context of Bobby Briggs and Shelley, but also Cooper, especially in the casino. I think this is a good example of that theme in a much more subtle way, which is these two characters maintaining some really core thread and relationship between them that is incredibly meaningful and potent, and yet, as you say, maybe drifting apart in their affectations, their methods, their eccentricities.
Just as they've gotten older, what Gordon will indulge in versus what Albert will indulge in, what they both consider tolerable behavior. Sort of. They are not aligned in the same way as like
the ratio between their job and their life and what it means to them. Yeah.
In season 1, if you ever saw Gorbert, that's their couple name. If you ever see Gordon, Albert, and Cooper in the same room, or like in Fire Walk with Me, the brief scenes that you see of them, it feels like they're like the tightest of tight-knit crews, and now it does not seem like that. It feels like they're drawn back together because of all this stuff happening, but maybe that's not the way their lives would have gone had it not been for old Dougie Jones popping out of an electrical outlet.
Yeah.
If I could go back to the day that Dougie Jones popped out of an electrical outlet.
It feels like so long ago. It feels like such a long time ago. Yeah. Well, was there any other FBI stuff? I mean, we get a couple other shots. We get Diane at the bar doing the coordinate stuff.
Yeah, which Google Maps its way onto Twin Peaks.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
That was also really cool to see, even though it's like from just like a dork standpoint, like just seeing it.
Not surprising, but
seeing it click, and then she just has like as Diane.
Yeah.
The character, like as a character who did not exist other than just a name Cooper said, so whatever. But just imagining that person's thought process as the cell phone just shows the name of a town in the middle of a screen that she probably hasn't really wanted to think about for 2.5 decades.
Yeah, definitely. Because she has no specific reason to assume any of this connects back to that, other than obviously the
Cooper's back.
Right. But I mean, like, there's no reason that, other than the fact that always relates to Cooper, like right now, like why,
it's inevitable because it's a story, but in her life, that wasn't an inevitable discovery.
Right, that's what I mean. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was a funny moment for me because I had gotten so accustomed to the, Laura Dern characterized version of Diane that I'm so accustomed to that now that I kind of forgot for just a microsecond that Diane was this like disembodied character.
I think that's why that moment works when you see Laura Dern look at basically the word Twin Peaks and the surrounding like miles of woods around it. You're like, it makes your brain like
how
suck
many
those
hours
things together.
Has she heard talking about hearing about
even
Twin
they specifically
Peaks.
say things. They specifically tell Diane, oh, you're not technically involved in this, but because you talked with Cooper and because you listened to tapes, blah, blah, blah. Even that does not connect the same way as just seeing Laura Dern read the words Twin Peaks on a JPEG.
Yeah. All right. Well, was there any other FBI thread stuff you wanted to address?
I don't think so.
Do you want to talk about Ben Horn? I guess first the scene of just the very brief scene with Miriam and then the follow-up with Ben Horn.
I mean, all that we really see is Miriam is in a hospital in intensive care. Yeah.
Yep. That was it. I really, really, really actually liked this Ben Horn scene.
Yeah.
I thought it was really good. I thought it was played really well. I always enjoy in Twin Peaks, and this goes back to the first two seasons. I always enjoy in Twin Peaks when two characters who we know very well individually encounter each other, and then you realize as an audience member, oh right, we never see these characters together.
Right.
Like these aren't characters who they're not brought together very often in the show, but they're probably also don't encounter each other that much in their fictional lives.
Like Ben Horn
show.
knows this guy because he's the sheriff, but through their conversation, it's very clear that the actual person that both of them know far more than each other is Harry Truman, the long-standing sheriff of Twin Peaks, with whom Ben Horn had, crossed paths in outrageous ways 20 years ago. But these two characters, very, very little.
Yeah, and I just thought it was a slow scene, and there was a lot of sort of recap of stuff we already know, but it didn't bother me in this case because the point of it wasn't that exposition. The point of it was just letting the weight of it sort of sink in and let these characters bounce off each other.
I agree. And to the point that I wasn't even thinking about the hotel room key until Ben Horn brought it out of his pocket. I was like, geez, okay, I've been waiting for you to hand this off forever, but I didn't care because it was just hearing Truman and Ben talk about the fallout from Richard Horn and just like what a nightmare he is to both of them for totally completely different. I guess that's the other person they have in common is Richard Horn.
Yeah. Ben Horn notably did not mention Richard Horn's assault on his grandmother, on Ben Horn's ex-wife.
Yes, he did not talk about that. He didn't bring it up independently when the police didn't bring it up. Yeah.
There was one thing that kind of bothered me about the way they chose to use kind of recapping of knowledge on this.
Mm-hmm.
There's a point at which Ben mentions Harry and says, Harry, comma, your brother.
Yep.
He points out that he's Truman's brother, but which whatever, that's fine. Like people sometimes talk like that, even though obviously the only reason it bothers me is because at one point then Ben asks Truman and the boy's parents, and Truman says, as you can imagine. They very outrageously dance around actually saying anything conclusive, like the parents' names or like where are they? What are they doing? As you can imagine. And yet we also have a character point out, Harry, your brother.
Yeah.
It's a very stupid thing to complain about, but it was noticeable to me.
It was very uneven for convenience.
Yeah, because it very, very conveniently walked around the one thing that would have been totally new to us. There's also just I thought, really effective capstone to that scene of Ben. Well, first he reminisces about the bike. I guess it's first to Beverly and then continues to do so himself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very typical kind of thing, right? Like you've got the older man reminiscing on his childhood, but I just thought he really sold it, and I really liked it.
That's also the exact sort of wistful monologue that Ben Horn has often been given and always just like eats up.
Yeah,
I think.
True. That's true. Yeah.
I was half expecting it to cross dissolve to him as a kid, because of the way that it did that. I think only once, but maybe twice.
Yeah.
In season 2.
Yeah. I mean, I
with
guess
young Ben and Jerry and like the dancing babysitter and the flashlight.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, totally. Wow, that would have been amazing. Yeah.
It would have been ridiculous.
A very different version of this for sure.
It flashed back to him in the 50s walking a girl home on a date, and then a bug climbed into her mouth.
Okay.
Oh, that's not what it did.
No. But I really liked it. I really liked his little reverie there. And I guess I wasn't thinking about this before, but I guess it is yet one more example of kind of aging, reflecting generational cycles, all of that stuff that we keep getting bits of.
Yep.
Yeah, I liked it. What next? We could talk about we talk about Audrey, the other horn.
Let's stay on this horn track.
Let's keep the horns going. This was, I mean...
Well, actually, we don't have to talk about the Jacoby scene in much detail, but I thought that the cut from him to this scene was very good.
Oh, sure. I mean, do you want to just mention Jacoby since you just did and just take that?
It was basically another Jacoby scene. I didn't entirely know what the purpose of it was other than to have...
Yeah, it was very, very much in line with past Jacoby scenes.
Including some audio, at least, if not some footage being, I think, actually reused.
Yeah.
But
it seemed like it.
It felt to me almost like that scene was put in there just because of the opportunity to create such a jarring cadence between it and the cut to Audrey Horne. I don't know, I'm sure that's not the real reason why, but those two things back to back.
Yeah. With his maximum spittle in beard.
Yeah.
Yeah. He really pushed.
Yeah, I mean, he was just because he screamed, "The ninth circle of hell will welcome you," and then it just cuts to Audrey standing by that fireplace.
Yeah. I mean, unless we want to recap all of the different names and relationships being suggested in this scene, it's basically just one. I mean, it's effectively just one big continuous conversation, right? It's not as though there are a bunch of different scenes we can discuss. What did you make of this? I don't know what I made of that.
I had no idea what to make of it. It felt like I didn't recognize any of the names other than, I guess, Billy. Billy has been said once by the kid who ran into the double R right before the end credits of one of
Billy.
And the subtitles incorrectly they listed the wrong name, but Showtime later said, sorry, he does actually say Billy.
Yeah.
So we've heard Billy said. Then they're talking about someone named Chuck. Her husband's name is Charlie, and those are both shortened versions of Charles. Which is, I mean, not that uncommon for Twin Peaks.
No,
not uncommon for Twin Peaks. It felt sometimes to me like they were almost talking about the story of Richard Horne, where they were talking about a truck being taken and bad things happening involving that. It also sometimes felt like Charlie, Audrey's husband, was either like holding her here or almost gaslighting her.
There's a contract. There's an explicit contract he mentions.
Right. But I mean, even inside the conversation where Audrey's like, I want to go to the Roadhouse. And he's like, well, there's a big forest between there and da-da-da-da. Fine, I'll make the phone call. But like he always sort of turns the conversation into a loop that will prevent Audrey from actually gaining any ground or leaving.
Yeah.
And it was so aggressively that to the point that I couldn't even tell if what I was looking at was real.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, even to the point of him saying, okay, we'll go. And he agrees to go.
And then he's like, but first, maybe I'll make the phone call, right?
Right. Well, he's like, I need to get my jacket. And she's like, get your jacket. And, and then he calls the person and then holds out.
It feels like she's actually in a nightmare to me. Like that actually, whether she literally is or figuratively is, it felt like an absolute nightmare to me to watch. Like it felt, I mean, it was interesting, but just like from Audrey's point of view,
kind of stopped being interesting for me after a while.
Okay, you're right. It had sort of a curve of when it got to the end and he was on the phone call, then just withheld all of the information. I was interested again just because of how absurd and infuriating it was. But
we actually have two emails about this that are relevant. I'm going to read one because it is directly relevant to what you're talking about right now. This is from the forums, the Twin Peaks Rewatch forums. That Thomas writes, do we know for sure that Audrey is out of the coma? Because the only way I could fully make sense of that scene, outside of the complete randomness being kind of funny, is that it might be a coma dream Audrey's having, where she's partially tuning into what's happening in the real world and incorporating it into the dream.
I saw that post after I watched the episode, and I thought it was I mean, we have no way of knowing whether that is true or has any way, but it was a really interesting thing to hear. It reminded me instantly, I guess, of Mulholland Drive.
Yeah. I don't have any reason to believe this is the case, but I do think it's an interesting comment.
And what
is this?
I mean, despite me saying all these things, it's also the part of that is just me not wanting Audrey to have this life. And if this is actually Audrey's life, what a disaster and what a bummer.
Yeah. Here's a funny email.
This is a crucial email.
We got from Claire Serto, who writes, hey guys, was it just me or did you legitimately assume for about 5 minutes that Audrey was trying to find Billy Zane? Regards, Claire Serto.
My brain did that where I was like, Billy, wait, is that?
I went for about 5 seconds.
I was like, no, that guy's name is Wheeler. Okay.
Yeah, it was about, the 5 seconds lasted about an eternity in my neural pathways firing with that one. I'm like, Billy,
where's Billy?
What is Billy Zane? Yeah.
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 Well,
I don't know what else to make of this scene.
Yeah, I don't either. I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
We're running out of. I keep saying that, but we've just watched episode 12.
Every time you say it, it gets more true. We are running out of episodes.
We only have 6 hours of this thing left out of 18.
Yeah, we're 2/3 done.
We're 2/3 done.
Yeah,
which is really intense given where we are right now.
Yeah, yeah. shall we talk about Sarah Palmer?
Yes. The Sarah Palmer stuff and the FBI stuff was easily like the maximum standout
Definitely, I agree.
content for me in
Highly
this
agree.
episode.
Yeah. Grace Zabriskie continues to be an absolutely
Holy
incredible actress.
Yeah, this. If I had seen just her two scenes as the only thing that showed me what Twin Peaks season 3 was, my mind would have exploded.
Yeah.
The stuff with her. I mean, I remembered when we first see her rolling down the grocery store aisle, picking up ingredients for a Bloody Mary.
Yeah.
And I think that's those scenes of her in the liquor store were some of the first actual footage we saw of Twin Peaks. It was in that the character montage, and I completely forgot about it until I saw her.
I don't even remember that now still.
This is a ridiculous thing to say, I guess, because it's just a liquor store full of junk. But what a really well photographed sequence that stuff was. We haven't actually talked about the cinematography of Twin Peaks: The Return very much.
Yeah,
partly
outside
because
of some of the establishing shots. And
the establishing shots, and also the totally weird stuff. Yeah. Partly because I think it's aesthetically a little bit of a mixed bag. It's hard to tell.
Sure,
it's not aiming for the same universal look. But there are some scenes in this game. Wow, there are some scenes in this show, especially places like this that are just a populated space that I think that Lynch and his cinematographer and whoever's doing the sort of color grading make look so interesting and just real, but in a beautiful to look at way. In this case, it was just a bunch of real dumpy liquor.
Sure.
And then a checkout aisle that has just been caked on full of things on hangers and gum packets and stuff over the years.
Yeah.
And that wall of beef jerky.
Yep.
And Sarah Palmer.
Yep.
And it was so aesthetically transfixing as well as just being interesting for all the other reasons.
Yeah. Well, in terms of those other reasons,
yes, let's talk about the scene.
I thought I don't know obviously what it means in the specifics, and it may mean nothing at all, which is totally fine with me. But her fixation on the turkey jerky as she learns what it is, and her sort of identification that something has changed about it, I thought was incredible and really it was something that I this season actually has not done very much, but the original run of Twin Peaks does a lot, which is to have that kind of fixation on something seemingly mundane, but that in the interiority of the character focusing on it is intensely meaningful in ways that are so overwhelming to them that they try and explain it, but it means not. It just doesn't mean anything coming out of their mouth.
That's also all over Fire Walk with Me.
Yes, actually, Fire Walk with Me probably even more so. Yeah.
But I think the thing that you notice is just that the turkey jerky is added.
It's different. It's a change.
There just wasn't something there, and seeing that something in the world is different made her think about something way deeper down inside of her that definitely. She senses has changed. Right. But that feeling of,
Well, okay, so here's, you know what? You bringing up Fire Walk with Me I think is really apt, because I think the thing that was so powerful about that scene for me is that it works on two levels, one of which is obviously Twin Peaks kind of wackiness and who knows what connections these are, if any, and what does this mean? And it's whoa, it's jerky, weird. It's just weird, right? But the other thing is just the sort of what felt to me a really potent portrait of someone who essentially has something akin to PTSD, right? I mean, and the idea that she is drawing a connection in her brain to something that, aside from discard all of the kind of supernatural and lore elements of Twin Peaks and everything else, that was an extremely traumatic event that is going to echo in this person's life indefinitely. And the defining characteristic of that event, as with, presumably many traumas, is that it was such an absolutely unimaginable break from what she knew and understood the world to be and the way things work. And it is totally, even if I'm obviously not a psychologist or psychiatrist, and I would never claim that this is actually just true or how people operate, but it felt true enough to me as a television viewer that her perception of something changing in the world in a way that breaks with what I imagine is a very well-established pattern of her going to this store and checking out, would sort of fire those neurons in a way that would be very distressing and cause a break for her. And it just in the moment played really well, and she carried it off extremely well. And even the people behind the register, I thought played it pretty well. It just, the whole thing felt really powerful to me.
I liked that they chose, when writing the scene, that instead of those two sort of teens or young people being confused or like being annoyed by Sarah Palmer, they were distressed. He was like, should I bring her groceries?
Yeah.
Like, his ultimate response
they didn't have
was
that, like,
geez.
weird old person.
Yeah, I know. They
were unnerved and
they were
kind of put
unnerved,
off,
but they ended up being sort of compassionate about it ultimately.
I agree. I thought that was nice. Yeah. It was really nice it was a tiny little reminder of the sort of small town Twin Peaks that we have seen fairly little of in this season, which is that this kid he just knows where this lady lives. Like, it's a small town. She probably comes in there all the time. They don't probably know each other well as people.
Right.
And it's like, oh, that's Sarah Palmer. I know where she lives.
Right.
That's...
Yep.
That was a great little detail, I thought.
Did it seem to you at times during this scene, that she was talking to herself, but actually there were two voices inside talking to each
100%,
other?
100%. Yes.
To the point that there was almost overlap?
Yes.
Not quite, but like it was hard to tell when her speech got really muddled.
For sure. I started to wonder, especially when Hawk shows up at her house.
When Hawk shows up,
if Bob was related somehow.
I know. I wondered that as well, of like just what is going on inside of Sarah Palmer's head, because she... in the middle of it, she answered one of his questions with like clenched teeth and like her facial expression and her speech mannerism changed and became that sort of very deliberate cadence.
She also, in the grocery store was talking to herself, talking to herself in the most literal way possible.
She was having a conversation with herself.
Where she was saying like, stop it, this, Sarah, like, get under control or whatever it was. That stuff was very, extremely, pushed to the forefront of it all. Well, before we leave the grocery store,
there's just more.
There's just a particular sort of line I want to mention in the vein of what we're just talking about. Mm-hmm. She says, your room seems different and men are coming. You have to watch out. Things can happen. Something happened to me. I condensed that a bit, but that's basically what she says. And it almost sounds like she's talking to Laura before her death. Like, it almost sounds like a warning that she is giving. Like, it made it sound like she is remembering things that happened to her. I don't know if she was ever directly abused by Leland the way Leland abused Laura.
Right.
But the way she was delivering all that really, to me, felt like bringing back those direct events. Obviously, I don't know if any of that's true, but that's how it came off to me, the way she said it. It was like a very sharp statement delivered as a clear warning.
No, you're right that that's her almost talking to Laura out of time is crazy.
Yeah.
I had not thought about that at all, but now that's really fascinating. And the idea of Sarah telling Laura literally the room seems different, and it being in reference to Laura's room, sorry, this is not what this means. But the first thing that I thought of was Laura hanging that painting up on the wall in Fire Walk with Me and actually putting up a piece of art in her room, which otherwise was clearly entirely decorated by her mom. Yeah. I'm sure that's not what this is about, but
might not be what it's about.
Chris, I'm positive.
To go even more afield, but it's clearly definitely related to this stuff in some sense. We see that ceiling fan immediately at her house.
Actually, to go back quickly to what Sarah was saying and it being a possible message to Laura, I think that you're right that it's that, but in the style of Twin Peaks, and especially Twin Peaks The Return, I like that it works both as an echo into the past and as probably a vague prophecy about the future, because we know
I think so.
That
things are happening.
Everything is converging on Twin Peaks,
definitely,
within this episode and the last couple episodes.
Definitely. Yeah. And then we see the ceiling fan at the house.
Seeing the ceiling fan again was a very potent reminder that Sarah Palmer has literally been living underneath the weight of this for 25 years.
Yeah. Yep.
Also, that ceiling fan is still so potent an image.
Especially with that sound
with a little
work that he does.
Yeah.
There was that reminds me, last episode, I don't think I mentioned this last episode, but we got a sort of framing of stairs on last episode that was not the same shot as the classical.
It was so evocative of it.
It was almost like an upside down version.
It was when Becky goes to Mustache Whisperer's apartment. That's that guy's name, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see that a very similar just
foreboding staircase.
David Lynch shooting a nothing object in the most terrifying way possible.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That was.
This ceiling fan shot, very good.
And then Hawk.
Sarah Palmer and Hawk talking is another two characters who don't usually interact,
Right.
but we know quite a lot of, and just catching the little scratches of their overlap in life is good.
Yeah, this was also just classic Hawk, right? In terms of sort of doing his job, pushing a little bit, but like ultimately being sort of a gentle person who doesn't want to like. And
Sarah Palmer concedes to why he's there in a very human way, which was really interesting, given how it turns, where she's like, okay, I know. Because all he says is some old investigations have opened up.
Yeah, which is true, but...
And you know, it felt like her saying, well, I know why you're really here. I read that or wondered if that was both, you know, her just being a normal human being who just... but also maybe wanting to get away. If Hawk was literally about to start asking her a question about Agent Cooper or about Laura Palmer or anything, if she's like, well, let's move it out of the way. Yeah. But... obviously, from there, then there's the rattling in the kitchen, and he says, someone in the house. Yeah. Is someone in the house? No, there's just something in the kitchen. And then she says, it's a goddamn bad story, isn't it, Hawk? That's what she says through gritted teeth.
Yep.
And then closes the door on him, basically.
Yeah, that's the scene. Yeah. Yeah.
What are we doing with only 6 hours of this left at this point?
I don't know. I don't understand how this works.
This season continues to just open up doors within doors within doors of weird characterization and weird plot. Yeah. And we got very little time for it to lock down.
I know. I don't understand. But whatever. There's no point. There's literally no point talking about it because
I mean, like our main thread moved very far today. It moved across the distance of 10 feet in the Jones family's backyard when Sonny Jim threw a baseball into Cooper's head, and then the camera cut away. Yep. So, whoop.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredible. I mean, you have to kind of admire this show to some degree for how willing it is to spend absolutely forever on what, in some cases, are definitely nothing. Right? Like that Roadhouse stuff at the end. That's not anything.
Yeah,
there's no way that's anything.
Those Roadhouse scenes all feel like they're those are the scenes that actually feel intended to just be little vignettes to show something, but they're not.
Sure, I mean, I'm not whatever. It's fine, but you know. Anyway, starring Kyle MacLachlan. Boof.
Yeah. No, I do admire it for that.
It's what it is. It's what it is, and I don't know what to say about it. Hutch and Chantal is the other sort of progression of direct plot we get in this episode.
Yes. It was basically the tiniest scene ever, right? I
mean, compared to this episode, it was not the tiniest scene ever. Compared to the scene we literally just talked about.
You're right. Also, it was a kind of distressing, horrible scene, if I remember correctly.
Well, it was a man murdering someone in cold blood.
With his child running out of the door screaming, Dad, and then their next stop is Wendy's. So that is exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
The kid coming out really messed me up and made me really sad.
It was really sad.
Like, there were a lot of people who objected very strongly to that kid getting hit by a car. That felt so much it felt almost like a cinematic trope to me, the way that it was shot and stuff, that my brain kind of just ignored it. But this, where you see the warden's body jerk and fall to the ground, and then in the same shot
as he starts to stumble up.
In that same shot, the kid runs out and starts screaming for his dad, and then they leave in the car. Good God.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's
good God.
It represents a willingness to depict, I guess, just callousness and brutality. Yeah. That has been not uncommon in this season. Yeah. Which, you know, is just going to be differently acceptable to different people. At this point, I don't really have a lot of interest in expressing a judgment about it. It is just, you know,
fair.
It's part of the toolbox of this season. If you do, then it's fine with me.
I don't. I'm not going to. What's the point in saying anything one way or the other? I also didn't dislike it or not want to see it in the show, but it did shock the hell out of me and make me feel really bad and uncomfortable. I find it interesting that is, we were talking about the two grocery checkers earlier with Sarah Palmer and their sort of small town compassion. The early run of the show, seasons 1 and 2, I guess basically anything, seasons 1 and 2 of the show,
Pre-Firewalk with
Me. Yeah, you see a lot of that style small town stuff, and then Laura Palmer, her murder is this huge exception that runs through it, but the sort of roots coming out of it or whatever, the sort of whatever fed into her murder is very clearly we see the investigation and the teens in the town walk those paths just far enough out to go, wow, okay, the world outside is real bad, but they don't show it. Yeah. And this episode, we have literally, minutes apart, that guy getting shot in the head, and then those two kids who see a woman have an aggressive panic attack or mental breakdown, and then their instinct is like, oh, I'm going to go give her groceries or whatever. Not that there's any direct correlation between those two things, but you also, you don't see those two types of behavior depicted in those ways to such that extreme back to back that often.
Right. No, totally. I mean, I also think that by complete coincidence, you and I were looking at a list of characters on Twin Peaks who are murderers.
Oh, it's because
before this episode.
We were looking up Hutch's page on a Twin Peaks wiki, and then it said he's in the categories characters.
Yeah.
Season 3 characters, murderers.
And it's worth remembering that there are. I mean, in addition to Laura Palmer, there are a lot of people who are killed in Twin Peaks. In total, a lot of those in the first 2 seasons of Twin Peaks are treated in sort of sometimes very sober way, sometimes in more of a kind of pulpy or hilarious way.
Yeah, sort of stylized cinematic.
Yeah, and I do think there is value to showing acts like that in a very raw and brutal way, because there's not, even if you're a minor character to someone else, I don't know. I'm not really going anywhere with this. I don't really have a point, but I think there is value in the degree of brutality the show is willing to put on screen.
Yeah, if they're going to show it, they actually try to show what seems to be their version of an unvarnished version of it, as opposed to either skirting around it or having this assassination scene be stylistically very cool, or
as long as the whole season ultimately sort of goes somewhere, and who knows what that is. I mean, any prediction any of us have had about any aspect of this season has been basically worthless to this point.
Yeah. Living in the middle of it, there's always the risk that it will feel ultimately purely indulgent or devoid of discernible meaning, or whoever knows what, but there's no point in getting into that.
Which surely, if we had been watching Twin Peaks season 2 during that original run, would have been a very easy assumption to make.
We also would have been kind of right during the middle of season 2.
Well, yeah, I know. I mean, that's kind of my point, I guess. Well, sort of. I don't know. Anyway.
But when David Lynch comes in and directs the finale of this season, it's going to really...
we never mentioned the very brief Jerry Horn scene. Speaking of small scenes.
Also, speaking of surprisingly beautiful scenes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Oh, it looked so nice.
Yeah, it really did.
That northwest vista.
There were some good exterior shots in this episode generally. There were a few of them, actually. Mm-hmm. Some good, misty mountains.
We were really all about those sort of drone shots of the Pacific Northwest, and they were all beautiful.
I mean, before Jacoby broadcast starts, we get that shot of the dark, cloudy moon. Mm-hmm. There's a whole bunch of those.
The moon being covered up by clouds happens maybe once an episode at this point. It is very much the stoplight shot of this season.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That Jerry Horn thing, it's more of that guy being wacky out in the woods. I have to imagine eventually something will happen to him.
It would not be surprising to me if, because of the way that sort of time dilation works, we're so many episodes past when Bobby found the little pill that told people about Jack Rabbit's palace.
Yep.
Without that storyline moving forward, it seems increasingly likely that we're going to end up in a world where everyone, for some reason, converges on that point.
I don't know.
I don't know. My assumption, which is probably wrong, is that Diane honing in on that dot on her phone, even though it says Twin Peaks, the number is far more specific than that. Yeah, and I feel like it's going to end up just being.
I assume it is.
It's that literally that same location.
But who knows? Yeah, but that's what I was guessing as well.
They're all going to be there, and then Dougie and Bad Coop are going to pop out of 2 electrical outlets.
Yeah.
And then Gordon will say, I don't know which one to shoot.
And then someone will say something that he misinterprets and shoots the wrong one.
Yeah, shoots the wrong one. Or did he? And we were wrong all along.
Yeah.
Bad Coop is regular Cooper.
Yeah.
He's just mad.
Anyway.
What, Chris? This is
no, you're right.
This is the content people want to hear.
Fan theories are correct.
Okay.
There's also the scene with Carl Rod at the New Fat Trout.
Oh yeah,
which was seemingly not particularly connected to anything, but was a kind of a nice. I mean, speaking of the kind of small town community stuff, that's slotted in well with that. Yeah,
people just kind of being nice or happy about things that are happening in their life or showing a little bit of compassion. There was actually a lot of those little beats, like the grocery store one and Hawk and this scene at the New Fat Trot, and even
Ben Horn to some degree.
Yes, and Gordon's appreciation of Preston joining into the FBI. Yeah. Like those were all there. It felt like there were a lot of moments of actual, like, real feeling human positivity in the face of kind of weird or bummer things. Yeah, which I liked.
Yeah. Well, I think that pretty much is the whole episode. I mean,
do you want to read this thing?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we have there was a post on the Twin Peaks forums that quotes a Reddit post from the Twin Peaks Reddit, I guess.
Yeah.
So this was found by Marblies on our forums and posted originally by Wanzi19, and it reads, "One of the return's themes is patience and impatience. Impatience is what Richard displays when he blows through an intersection and kills a child. What Bradley Mitchum shows when he shouts at Candy, Bradley becomes sick with impatience when he can no longer wait to kill Dougie Jones. It's what the angry woman honking demonstrates when she's shouting at Bobby. Her impatience in the scene precedes a violently sick child. Audrey in episode 12 is taken to insulting and shouting in her impatience with her husband's lack of action. Impatience is what Hutch and Chantel talk about before killing the warden coldly in front of his son. The counter to this is obviously patience, which Betty Briggs in her scene in an earlier episode displays and is rewarded for beautifully when she waits 25 years for the day her son and fellow officers show up at her door. Dougie and Janie use patience with the police officers and are allowed to leave freely. Rodney and Bradley are patient with Bradley's dream playing out before them and are rewarded with the greatest gift ever, $30 million. A display of pure goodness with Dougie being shown love from the old woman and most of all cherry freaking pie. So what I'm saying is, impatience with this series leads only to Garmonbozia. Appreciate those long, quiet scenes you're supposed to look around. It's a painting, the colors and faces are beautiful. Patience will lead you to Valhalla filled with coffee and cherry pie that will kill you. And yeah, I thought that was kind of just a fun take.
Yeah.
I'm wary of like too many kind of like one-to-one reading the audience into kind of interpretations.
Yes.
Just because of how frequently uninterested David Lynch seems to be in that kind of thing. But on the other hand, it doesn't really matter.
Even if you take the
what
audience
his intention is or not. Right?
I liked this write-up on, like, I've seen a few people on our forums and email and just online talking about this notion of patience versus impatience. And I like this specifically because, as you said, you don't need to include, oh, this character or this scene is a surrogate for the audience being annoyed. Why don't we ignore that? Because a lot of the audience isn't annoyed. Isn't annoyed.
Yeah. Well, on that, I guess that can wrap up our episode.
Thanks, Reddit.
Be patient. In conclusion,
I'm bad at that.
Yeah, well, aren't we all? If you have any email that you would like to send us about the next episode of Twin Peaks: The Return or anything else about the series, you can do so by writing to twinpeaks@idlethumbs.net. And again, I'm going to call out our wonderful forums, the Twin Peaks Rewatch forums. If you go to twinpeaksrewatch.com, there is a forum thread link on every single episode page. And those threads always go up before our podcast does, so you can discuss the episode, even if we haven't done so yet. And those are incredibly active threads with a very thoughtful and courteous community for the most part. They're just great places to talk about the episodes. I always like reading them. They're really good. TwinPeaksRewatch.com for links to those, as well as all the other places we are on the internet. And with that, we will be back next week for part 13. I'm Chris Remo.
I'm Jake Rodkin.
Bye.
Bye.